Now let's look at the 512's arpeggiator. You go into the arpeggiator mode by hitting the arpeggiator key. The light will light up and you'll notice you hear nothing on the keyboard. And that's because the clock's not running yet. Go ahead and hit the play key and it'll begin blinking at the tempo. And our arpeggiator is playing, but no notes have been entered. So go ahead and lay your hands on the key. And there you're just hearing these three notes arpeggiating up. If we add a fourth note, it's playing that. If we remove notes, it plays those instead. We can go to a different octave range. Increase our cutoff here. So that's what you would expect to get from an arpeggiator. You also have the range and direction controls, which are going to affect the playback. Let's just set the range for 2 octaves, so now you're going to get more of a disco kind of bass line sound. So what it's doing there is every time it gets done playing the full range of notes, it'll create a reiteration at however many octave ranges we've assigned. We can assign up to plus or minus 4. Let's see what 4 sounds like. And let's see what the lower ranges sound like. Let's play a higher note. Let's set that for 3, so it's repeating 4 notes. And we can add more notes. And at any time, if we want to remove our hands, we can press the hold key and let up on the keys. Something I will like to point out is that, again, if we release the hold key, our arpeggiator stops. But when we are holding keys live and activate the hold key, this hold function is not actually engaging until we release all the keys. So if I just remove my finger from one of the keys, it's still like I'm in the live mode. So it's not until all the keys are released that arpeggiation becomes latched. So when you are holding multiple keys, you need to remove your hand, all your fingers at the same time. Like that. Now let's go ahead and bring in some little virus to accompany the excess that we're hearing. Let's go ahead and set our range for 0. The other thing is, once the hold mode is active, we can now, instead of just playing notes and having them entered into the arpeggiator in ascending order, we can enter notes in any order. Let's start with this note. So there I'm using multiple pitches a couple times in different orders, and it remembers that order. We can go into the direction and select different directions. Now it's playing backwards. We can play up, down. We can select a different octave range. And we can try a different up-down version. And there's even random. We can add in the octave reiterations. And when you are randomizing and have the octave reiteration set to something other than 0, it's not only selecting a different pitch, but it's also selecting a different octave at a random interval. So it truly is random in both ways. Let's go back to just our up direction. And we're just going to set the range back to 0. Another thing I'd like to show you about entering notes into the arpeggiator is due to the touch nature of the keyboard. You know, normally you have to press keys and they'll latch like this. But since you can slide your finger, you can also enter arpeggiations using just a single finger. You can also use a chord structure and slide your fingers. Alright, that's interesting. Let's go ahead and play with changing the MIDI channel on the fly. And we're going to be changing the voice of the virus. There's a lot of different stuff you can do as far as performing these arpeggiations. We can also go into the transpose mode and do a little linear transposition. We can add modulation, or do some pitch bend. Now if this sound was set up for aftertouch, let's just go ahead and activate aftertouch and see if it is. While we're in the transpose mode, we can activate some aftertouch messages. And it doesn't appear that that sound is aftertouch sensitive. Let's try a different one. Nothing on that one. I don't have any aftertouch set up on these sounds, it appears. The idea though is that you can be transposing these sounds plus modulating aftertouch and perform that as well on the fly. So here we've got there we're just doing linear transpose. We can do octave transpose as we mentioned. We can also do scalar transposes by holding the transpose key. Let's go ahead and pick a pattern of multiple notes here. Oops, I'm still in the transpose mode. Now let's go ahead and do some scalar transposing. Go ahead and add some direction changes and some octave reiterations. Or let's go ahead and try the random direction. Let's enter less notes. Go ahead and set our transpose, our scalar transpose back to 0. Let's go ahead and turn on linear transpose. Even though it's being randomized, you can still transpose and hear the musicality in it. Or do scalar transpose. or we can assign a completely different scale. Let's get out of here. Harder to hear that because it's randomizing. Let's go ahead and take the direction, go like that, and let's enter in a different arpeggiation. Now we can change our scale. Let's try some pentatonic scales. Or some of the more exotic scales. Go back to the major scale, and now let's play with the way the scale is mapped to the keys. Notice we're now in partial mapping, and we're not hitting those high notes anymore, but we're still playing the same notes of the scale. Also, we can flip the entire scale on the keyboard. Now it sounds like we're playing backwards, but we're really not. If we go to direction, we're still playing up, but if we change the direction, it sounds like this instead. We add in a little octave on it. And let's go and enter just a simpler. And notice that our keyboard is symmetrical, so if we were to be playing this note, and we change the direction of the scale, it sounds identical. So there's a lot of interesting ways you can enter these arpeggiations. One other thing I forgot to demonstrate on the arpeggiator is using chords, which is a big part, so let's go ahead and look at that. So we're controlling our virus here because it's multi-timbral. We've got the arpeggiator on, hold mode on. Let's go ahead and start the little arpeggiation. And now to assign different chords. Right now we're just playing an individual note. Let's select a different chord. Play an octave. And once we have a chord playing, we can transpose it. We can also do chord inversion. Or see how that sounds with other sounds. Select a different chord. Let's choose a different sound. So you've got 29 different chords that you could play live, basically, and change those. You can transpose them, do the chord inversion, and yeah, just another great feature that you could do with the 512 Arpeggiator. as an example of being in poly mode and using the arpeggiator sequencer with chords to spit those individual chord notes out on different MIDI channels, let's go ahead and enter the ARP mode. We got hold selected. I just have a simple little arpeggiation built in, and let's start the playback of the arpeggiator. Here we're playing just a one note chord. Let's go ahead and apply some of those chords we wrote earlier. And now you can hear different notes going out to different sounds. Let's change that chord. And again, if we go into transpose mode, we could transpose it. Let's say we want to add some aftertouch. Or add some odd wheel. Add some pitch bend. Let's do some scalar transposition. Change the octave. Change the direction. Change the range. Or let's go in and just manually play the arpeggiator. The arpeggiator in the 512 offers rhythm patterns as well to control the note on, note off, note duration, velocity value, and to determine which steps will glide. Let's go ahead and check out how we would write our own rhythm patterns. First, you go into the arpeggiator, hold the arpeggiator key, and select one of the 29 keys that represent one of the user-writable rhythm patterns. I'm going to go ahead and select this one, and once it's selected, go ahead and hold the arpeggiator key, press the play key. We've now entered the record mode. At this point, the keys of the keyboard are mapped out with different note durations. You've got like 5% down here, 50% here, 100% here, all the way up to a sustain note here. In between those, even the minor keys and major keys, you have varying note durations. So what you'd want to do is if you wanted to enter a 50% note in, you just simply press this key. And you notice as I'm pressing, this LED here is advancing. Let's go back to the beginning. When you first enter into the record mode, you're going to see the 0 LED lit up. That indicates that we are at the first step of the bar. And the +1, 2, 3, and 4. those LEDs indicate what beat of the bar we are currently on. We can write up to 16 steps into the rhythm pattern. And the other thing I should say is if you enter, or when you enter, the record mode for the rhythm pattern, there are some defaults set. So if we don't define, let's say the velocity or accent level, is all the notes are going to automatically default to a value of 127. But let's say we want to write varying velocity values or send note values other than 127, you would hold down the accent key. And now the 29 keys of the keyboard represent everything from a very low velocity all the way up to, I believe, 127. So you'd make your selection of the velocity. Let's go ahead and select 127. And now we are ready to enter in the rhythm duration. So we could select a duration. We could press the rest key if we don't want any note to happen on that step. Or if we want this step to glide, we could hold the glide key and press a key. So let's go ahead and just write a simple sequence. Let's start with a 100% note duration, followed by a 50%, another 50, let's do a rest. And then let's go a sustain. And the sustain, let's sustain it, and then do a 50%, 50%. Now let's do some short ones. And a long one. And the nice thing is, if you make a mistake, you can press the negative button and re-enter that note. So let's say I want to sustain, sustain, rest, short, 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 50%, rest. And you'll notice after I've entered 16 values, the record LED automatically goes out. If you did not want to enter an entire 16 notes, let's say you were on step 3 and you wanted to exit, you could just hit the play key and you'd exit. So now we've got that pattern. Let's go ahead and start the arpeggiator, turn our hold mode on, and play some notes. Let's see what that pattern sounds like. So that's the rhythm pattern we just wrote. Let's go ahead and check the default and see how much different that sounds. Now the thing you'll notice here is I'm changing the rhythm pattern on the fly from the default pattern here to the one I've written, and any changes I make are being made on a note-by-note basis. That leads us to a different concept that we're going to try here, and that concept would be that we can go in here and let's select another pattern to write to. And now that it's selected, let's go ahead and hit the record mode. And let's go ahead and this time we're going to enter in all 16 notes of the pattern in various ways. So let's go ahead and start with some very short notes. We wrote those 16. Now let's go ahead and select a different pattern. And this one we will write with much longer notes. And let's do a third pattern. And this one we're going to write with just sustain notes. And let's do one more here. And this one we're going to write with rest. Oops. Alright, let's go ahead and get an arpeggiator going. And you'll notice nothing's happening, and that's because the last pattern we wrote is all rest. Let's go ahead and select the default pattern. So these notes are playing at a 50% duration. Here's our short little notes we wrote. Here's our longer notes we wrote. And those notes we wrote as sustains. Let's go ahead and select this. Let's select a different MIDI sound. And try selecting our patterns different. And you'll notice that sound is sustaining because all the notes are written to a sustain. If we go back to our short period, or if I want to make every note play as a rest, so that gives you a way to enter in patterns for a specific set. Let's say you want all the notes to glide, or you want accent to be a different level for every individual pattern, and then you can select patterns on the fly to really control that arpeggiator live by changing the velocity value, turning glide on and off, or changing note durations, or just selecting your own rhythm pattern that you want to constantly vary step by step. So there's a lot of different ways you can apply rhythm patterns to the arpeggiator and change them on the fly for a lot of different results.